that much better. We learn in our sleep. That's clear. There's a lot we don't know about the reasons for sleep, but it seems that in particular it's about learning and consolidating. A neural connection's being formed. It doesn't just happen, it takes time. So there's a lesson in patience there, isn't there? Children, you're normal, that's how it works. Trust in the learning process. It will manifest itself, but not immediately. That doesn't happen. It's not how it works. Particularly, these are complex skills that the brain has to come to grips with. Music learning is the most complex thing we do after speech. Right, and we'll have an example of that. So, Matthew Walker. These are quotes from one of his studies. Practicing a procedural memory does not improve performance until hours later. Skimping on sleep stymies these crucial cognitive processes. Some aspects of memory consolidation only happen with more than 6 hours of sleep. John Medina wrote a book called Brain Rules. Has anyone come across Brain Rules? And he's found the same thing. That students, if they think they'll do well by cramming for their exam the next day and they skimp on sleep, it compromises the memory formation of that day. So be careful. Sleep is so important for consolidating. Potential implications, particularly with skilled actions such as learning a musical instrument. All such learning of new actions may require sleep before the maximum benefit. So learning isn't always evident. And for me, that's, I hope these children understand that. This is normal. Okay? So, time for a chat. Now, if you want to stretch and go outside, because I think we'll take about 10 minutes for this one. What does good practice look like? What do you like to see? How do you teach it? Do you teach it? If so, what are some of your methods? And then we'll come back. Is that clear? So 10 minutes in whatever groups you'd like to form. See you in 10. Learning from one another, getting some ideas. So, I'd like to start us off. Now, I know a lot of these might seem obvious, but let's get them down anyway. Often we assume things the kids...
I'll just relate a story that happened to me many years ago. I was learning flute at University of Melbourne, and we were talking about practice and all that. The guy's name was Leslie Barker, and I don't know if you know him. He, out of the blue one day, he said to me, you know, Keith, he said, I can do in 40 minutes what all my university students take 2.5 hours to do. And I said, how come? He said, I only practice what I can't play. And I've maintained that rule ever since. Take the bits you can't play. Don't keep playing the things you can play. You become much more efficient with time.
Okay, thanks, Keith. Summarising that, isolating specific passages for further attention, zoning in on passages. Is that on this point, Mike?
Yeah, it is.
Yep.
Well, we just mentioned something, so being able to, it's identifying the things that you can't do, which is the issue, isn't it? Because talking about the point which you mentioned earlier, Michael, where if the teacher is the oracle of all sort of knowledge, then a student doesn't have the confidence or context to be able to identify what needs to be worked on. And so you've got that issue whereby if you're teaching the student to learn, that's very different to, this is good enough, now move on, or why.
See, that reminds me of a little story too. I was giving a masterclass in Luxembourg, and pretty good musicians. I think the lad that I was listening to was playing that G minor, you know, that Rachmaninoff, that if you're a pianist, yeah, so he's pretty good level pianist. And there's two things I got out of this, but the second one we'll talk about later. But he could not identify where the real issue was. He just went back to the start, like McPherson said, 80% of young children, they just play it once through they always go from page one, don't they? Bar one, page one, da-da-da-da, and that's where it starts. So that ability, who mentioned this in their satellite discussions? So that specifying, isolating, but that step that Mike said really comes beforehand is they've got to know how to identify. And that's where we mentioned Socrates with a Socratic teaching method. What's that about anyway? It's about asking questions, isn't it? That's what the Socratic teaching method, where are you having difficulty? So rather than us tell them, as Mike said, they have to learn to identify. They have to think for themselves. Okay, that's a huge area, the power of listening. Richard Gill said recently, an Australian, he said, without listening there is no learning. Well, I would give that 100%, but there's a very good point there, isn't there? That listening is a crucial skill. And that's what's great about an activity such as music listening. Music gives opportunities for complex levels of listening, really acute levels of listening, for diverse periods of time. So the old-fashioned, if you like, listening analysis, what do you hear type lesson, that's got a great place in education. Because there's a lot of schools we know, maybe not over here, certainly in Western countries, where it's jolly hard to get the classroom to be quiet for any period of time. There's real issues in that inability to listen.
Or critiquing themselves.
Yeah.
Through
That's right.
listening. Or each other.
And one of the best teachers I had at Adelaide University, he didn't say, it was amazing for me at the time. I remember going home to my mother and said, I've got this new piano teacher, doesn't teach me anything, he just looks at me. And I'm 18, not too good with periods of silence, so I start babbling on and I start saying, well, maybe I should bring out more of the left hand, or, I'm teaching myself. He was my best teacher because he didn't teach me anything. Sort of, yeah. Okay, are we still on this first point before we move on? So this ability. Now, some people, this is related, some people use the term chunking, just working on a little bit at a time. I reckon that's one of the big three, what you just talked about. So we're going to give that a bit more attention, and we'll uncover a bit of the why it works. Because when I look at learning and practicing, we've got a great advocate in the world of neuroscience to help us know how learning really occurs well and how it sticky learning, as they say. So chunking is in my view, one of the three big principles, major principles of practice. Now, Laura, you said something. No, I know what you said. Well, if you repeat it, it'll come back to you.
Oh yeah, repetition is another third.
Repetition. Repetitio est mater studiorum. Huh? You're a Catholic school girl, did you Latin? No. Who mentioned repetition? Okay, we'll talk about repetition, the mother of learning. Possibly the most important. Can't learn without repeating. The brain doesn't make new connections. What is learning anyway? What does it mean? Do students know what learning actually means? It's a physical thing. It's not just in the ether somewhere. The brain is a physical lump, isn't it? What is new learning? New learning is a connection in the brain. That's what learning is. How do you get new connections in your brain? We'll talk about that. Any metacognitive learner will determine for themselves how many repetitions it takes to secure a musical phrase. What we do know, though, is children and adults vastly underestimate the number of repetitions to secure new learning. And goals, of course, that's that almost step before to get that drive to work. But when I sit down and practice, I've got goals in mind. Okay, I want to work half an hour, 10 minutes on the Beethoven, 10 minutes on this, whatever. So yeah, goals are essential to know what we're aiming to achieve. You mentioned modelling too. See, now you're talking about how to teach these skills. And we're going to talk more about modelling and mirror neurons and the effectiveness of modelling over verbal instruction. Carrie McPherson again found that by and large, with all respect, instrumental music teachers are a bit too verbose in their teaching pedagogy, where a simple model in many cases would be more effective. Okay, showing, hey, watch me, now you do this. We learn from models, like we learn to walk and talk that way. Yep.
But isn't it part of those that explaining to them, this is how your brain is working, this is how your fingers have memory, and by repeating it and explaining it so they understand that their fingers actually have that muscle memory. Why are we repeating it 3 times? It's kind of the why of why are we doing this 3 times, 6 times, 9 times, just so they're and then connecting it with you want to kick a goal, you know, in soccer up in the top corner, where all these muscles are working together. To say you have to do it so many times for them to understand the actual process. But I understand that we may be too verbose and they may disconnect. But shouldn't we spend some time explaining how they're actually learning?
Absolutely. Explanation is wonderful and important, but perhaps not at the expense of having them experience it personally and to do it. There's some books by a guy called Tim Gurway, The Inner Game of Tennis, The Inner Game of Golf. If you read The Inner Game of Tennis, he talks, there's The Inner Game of Music, that wasn't by him, it was someone called Green, I think. The Inner Game of Tennis, he says he was struggling as a tennis coach to teach the serve to some learners. So he decided to zip it and just say, now you do it. And it was much more effective in his teaching. There's that old Confucius saying, and I don't have it on the top of my head, but what is it? Tell me and I forget, show me and I remember, let me do and I understand. Which is actually similar to the creed of surgeons. I was giving a talk at Shaw in Sydney, that school. I was giving a talk in Sydney at the beginning of the year, and a brain surgeon, who was for parents as well, came up to me afterwards and said, Michael, that William Glasser taxonomy on learning, we'll see it later, that you showed us, that's what we do in medical school. As surgeons, in order to know that we have really learnt a procedure, it's watch one, do one, but then there's another step, teach one as well, the power of teaching to others. So yeah, explanation, and we are cerebral and we're curious. We don't just want that procedural knowledge, I can do it but I don't know why, so sure. But learning skills, modelling is very powerful. No one explained to little babies about why they were doing their talking, they just did it. Mind you, we speak 15,000 words a day, teenage girls more, so so we get lots of practice. Our kids learn 5,000 new words a year from the age of 4 to 8 or whatever it is. Where are we? Yeah, so we've talked mainly about repetition and chunking and the teaching pedagogy. Let us not forget the power of the model. Anything else? Anne-Marie?
Find a peer and practice together, so that you've actually got to talk to each other and explain what's going on. Not a parent, but someone your own age, and then accompany each other, because you really know you've got something if you've got to accompany somebody who's singing or someone who's playing violin.
Well, there's a couple of things there. First is the power of peer mentorship, working together. And we just mentioned that surgeon creed I referred to, about the power of teaching one another. When we talk about metacognition, we'll look at that more, but extremely effective, that's right, to work together. Group collaboration. Who was it? Lucy Green wrote that book on informal learning. She's a London-based music educator. The power of informal groups, the power of the garage band. And Piaget said that teachers, often students explain things to one another better because adults don't understand childish intelligence that well. And it's interesting, isn't it? You've probably had similar experiences to me where you think you've given an eloquent explanation of how this works. The kid, particularly in maths, I used to teach a bit of maths, the kid scratches their head and Johnny over there says, something, they go, oh, I've got it now. How to go with it. So children are great at that. So tap into their natural collaborative enthusiasm. Yeah, okay?
The time or times of day that you choose to practice are important for your mental well-being and the efficiency of the practice, and the environment or ambience in which you choose to practice is also very important.
And on the first point, Robert Schumann said, look, if you're tired and you're not into it, just stop and do something else for a while, right? And when you say the time or times of the day, see, when we talk about the quantity of practice time, there's a lot of students I've found who still don't understand the power of distributed practice versus blocked practice. So, okay, I aim to do half an hour a day. I'm 12 or whatever, I'm doing half an hour a day. So that's, I'll have some days off, or that's 6 hours a week, right? So 3 hours a week. Some kids will think if I do 2 hours on Wednesday, beauty, I'm ahead. But we know from people like Ernest Hemminghaus, the German psychologist in the mid-1800s, who taught us about the power of distributed learning. If you're going to learn, William James, the psychologist, said the same thing. If you're going to learn something, a little bit every day is a better way to distribute your time. Big blocks are not that effective unless it's on a regular basis. Who was here? Suzuki. Sir, when should I practice? Only on the days that you eat. A little bit. That's what he said. That's the quote anyway. Yeah, a little bit distributed. So that's something else. Yes.
I think it's really critical that the parents understand what is going on and what the expectations are, and especially in a place like this, sometimes we're dealing with students who are first generation lesson takers, so their parents have no experience personally with how it's supposed to look.
Well, we referred before about relationship is one of the pinnacles of fostering intrinsic motivation. And what I didn't say at the time was there are plenty of studies support that personal relationship is one of between teacher and student is one of the keys in students deciding to persevere with music learning. Another key, or at least a very important factor, and these are generalisations like psychology always is, it doesn't mean it's black or white, is that parental interest. And when I talk in schools, or when I set up talks, like I'm doing a tour in Australia in early next year for the start of their school year, it's, hey, they invite me to speak to their students on music, and I say, well, let's make it a twilight presentation. Get the mums and dads along. We need to educate parents about a whole range of issues. And so many parents, like they would come to you, they come to me saying, I know nothing about music, I can't help it. Yes, you can. You don't have to be musical to know when something is outrageously fast. Right? Everyone has the ability to pick up dissonance, which in their repertoire will most often mean wrong notes, unless you've got kids playing Webern and stuff. Okay, opinion. So they can. They understand dynamic variation, they understand tempo, they understand wrong notes. A simple comment like, hey, that's my favourite, can you play that again for me? Encourages repetition and gives some personal interest. So there are very simple ways to ask our parents, and when I'm in a school context, I'll put something in the newsletter from the music department every week. Take every opportunity, and it might be a quote from something I've read, or an excerpt from this, or a really cool website, or something of my own, but I will have things for the parents on how they can support little Susie with her practice. And if it means, Mum, do your ironing in the same room, and well and good. They need that support. Suzuki understood that as well as anyone. Yeah, it's about being switched on, and that's why perhaps for some students, smaller rather than longer sections of time would be more effective where they're at, depending on the individual. Again, Robert Schumann, if you're not into it, just stop for a while. I used to tell students, if you start to think about what's for dinner, just have a walk around your house. Go and get a cup of tea, go to the bathroom, do some push-ups, whatever. Get yourself back, because learning is focused. And you take repetition. One of the issues of repetition is when it becomes a drill that is not focused, and mistakes creep in. And what we know about drills, block drills, is they deliver a delusion of competence. A delusion of competence. We'll talk a bit about that in a moment. Michael?
I was just going to say, what I hear a lot is parents will say, I hear my child playing a lot, so they're practicing, and I don't understand why the teacher says they don't do any practice. So we have to help them to understand the difference between practicing for pleasure, in other words, playing the piece you like over and over again, and actual practicing to learn something that you can't play.
And even, I've even had parents who haven't even heard from practice. They say, but he's in his room all the time.
Yeah.
And Anna and I, we talked a little bit about, well, you mentioned the 10,000 hours.
Yeah.
Erickson is at pains to differentiate 10,000 hours of expertise. He says, we're not talking about 10,000 hours of experience here. We're talking about 10,000 hours of jolly hard work, of deliberate practice, which is quality practice that we're talking about. So, so many messages we need to get to help our parents understand, and so forth. The other aspect of maturity is that music grows on people with repeated listening. That's, I guess, why so many say classical composers repeat at every section. The more you hear it, you'll like it one day. Whether you like it or not. Thanks for that. What about, did anyone mention slow practice?
Yeah.
Oh, did. Now, when I do this with children, often children don't go, some groups don't come up with slow practice and say, has anyone been told by their teacher to practice slowly? And every hand goes up. Well, why didn't you mention it? Why? Because they don't understand it, they can't do it, and they don't do it. When I say they can't do it, they don't know what slow means. So we're going to talk about slow practice too, because slow practice is extremely powerful. Okay, how are we going? We've got 12 minutes before coffee. So we'll go into this well into the next session. You okay with that? Because I'm happy to move along and take all the questions. I don't have an agenda I have to plough through, as long as we're all thinking and engaging. For me, neuroscience and how the brain works is a great driver of practice. So I like to give students, and part of the explanation if you like, Neuroscience 101. So the human brain, how many brain cells do we have? Does anyone know? Approximately. Well, there's a recent study from the UK saying that it's always 100. It's 100 billion. We've all got about 100 billion neurons. Okay. A study came out this year saying they think we're going to have more. But hang on, fellas. The good news. Take a seat there for a minute. The good news is, it's not the number of neurons that make us intelligent.
Qualities.
Okay?
The qualities.
It's the size of the neurons. It's some aspect. Because they cut open Einstein's brain after he died, and they thought, gee, he's got 100 billion just like you and me. Right? But it was richly, there's two things. One, it was myelinated, we'll get to myelin later. But it's not how many neurons you've got, it's the connections, right? 100 billion can make trillions upon trillions of connections. And like I've just been saying to UK school children, if you want mashed potato brain, sit down and watch Neighbours all day on the sofa, and that's what you'll get, right? Because if you want a richly connected brain, you've got to do things. Your brain, Norman Doid's The Brain That Changes Itself, a great introduction to neuroscience. How do you get a richly connected brain? You read books, you have good stimulating conversations. You move your body in a variety of ways, in sport and dance and the gym and whatever. There's oodles of opportunity. And best of all, you make music. So again, it's an advocacy lesson because we know that nothing lights up the brain to the same extent that music making does. It's the most widely varied on different parts of the brain. And there's a dichotomy in the brain as well. There's left and right hemisphere, virtually separate. So they don't interfere with one another, except for the corpus callosum that joins the two hemispheres, which is a bundle of nerves, which is larger in musicians than non-musicians because there's more traffic going around the brain. Frank Wilson, neuroscientist from the States, not a musician, just a neuroscientist, he says when you scan the brain under the condition of making music, it lights up like a pinball machine. Nothing comes close. Daniel Levitin says the same thing. If any of you have read his stuff, and This Is Your Brain on Music is a book on Daniel Levitin. Incidentally, I've got lists of these books that I'm quoting, so we can always get to that at another time. Yep.
I'm sorry, this is a language issue. What is dichotomy?
Sorry, dichotomy.
How do I
Almost
spell it, first of all?
D-I-C-H, dichotomy, O-T-O-M-Y, dichotomy. So it's a division of ideas or a division of situations. So our brain is really divided into two sections, left and right hemisphere. So it's the enormous power of connections that gives us opportunities for complex thinking and complex doing. Because everything we do is driven by the brain. All movement, it's the motor cortex that drives it. The motor cortex. And what we know about the motor cortex is that most of the real estate of the motor cortex is devoted not to the footballer's thighs and biceps, it's to the mini muscles, the muscles in the hands and the fingers, and the mouth and the singing, the speaking apparatus. So speaking, and this is where creativity is. And for that, the pinnacle of human skill development is the musician. Particularly, and this is not a bias, it's just about finger movements per second and dexterity. Instruments like the piano and the violin demand a lot. So we get back to that 10,000 hour rule of expertise. Well, the recent Leeds International Piano Competition, the average number of practice hours was 25,000 hours. Right? Put that into context. 10,000 hours basically means almost 3 hours a day every day for 10 years. Right? So 25 is a lot. So the thing about new connections is, and I say to children, hey, who could do their shoelaces up the first time they try? And they can't. Of course they can't. Always get some smart kid who reckon he can. But so the principle, how new learning occurs, nothing happens after one go. And in the brain you might have electrical discharges trying to make a jump and create a new synapse, and don't have to worry too much about the tech language, but a new circuit of action, let's say. But it always takes several attempts for that to happen, and then several more attempts to consolidate. So that's why for me, your little quote, repetition is the mother of learning, even for this well-known little ditty. Yes, thank you, Mr. Scene selection, what's that? Is the number one. We refer to the complexity of music. So we take a little piece that some of you are familiar with, if you're a pianist. What is this one? Fantasy Impromptu. I think I might have it here. So what's difficult about it? I'd ask the children. And they would say, well, it's really fast, sir, it's really fast. So let's quantify it. It's about 19 notes per second. That's what's happening, 19 notes per second. 19 notes per second is about 380 muscle movements. That's what the brain, the motor cortex, has to coordinate. which is why I tell the footballers in my audiences, I'm sorry, but we are the super athletes of the world. Let's get that clear and we'll all get okay. It's the mini muscles, that's it. There's serious complexity. And as you know, with this particular piece, it's not just the tempo either. The left hand, we've got 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. So you've got that 3 against 4. And I've done this with parents, so okay, let's do 2 against 3, undulate. 1, 2, let's all do it. 1, 2, 1, 2, left hand, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. Right, Mike, you do really well, okay. Now go 3 against 4, go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's a bit harder, doesn't it? So, how do you play, and as we know, the notes, this is the first step. Music's all about the transmission of emotional content. You know, the emotional experience expressed in tone, that's what music's really about. So the notes, this is all the first step, isn't it? And when we're playing this, am I thinking, and now I'll put the 4th finger on the C sharp? Not, because it goes just too quick for our brains to consciously be aware. So the only way to play complex virtuosic music is to automate. And the only way to automate processes is repetition. So repetition is required to establish a neural connection, and upon further repetition, a special chemical reaction occurs in the brain. And it's what's known as myelination. Myelin is the stuff of experts. It's actually a white protein fatty substance. It's a, what do you call it? Not a superconductor, an insulator. An insulator. And what it does is it speeds up the transmission of data along the circuits of action in the brain, apparently up to 150, 200 times. Wow. It can automate processes. It makes skills look more effortless. It makes that transmission of data also more accurate. So experts, and that's what they found about Einstein. Gee, he's only got 100 billion neurons like we have, but richly connected brain, densely connected brain, with stacks of myelin on the circuits of action. Okay, incidentally, again, Einstein, advocate for music. They say that scientists often think artistically and artists think scientifically, like Leonardo da Vinci. Super learning and creativity. He's another wonderful advocate for our learning area, isn't he? Particularly to the STEM people and STEM subjects out there. Because he so clearly, and his wife Elsa tells these stories, that when he had issues with his inspiration and with his work, you know, E equals MC, I can't quite get this one. He'd down tools, and he used to play 2 instruments. What did he play? Violin and a piano. Yeah. Now Schubert, Bach and Mozart, they were his 3 favourites, but whatever. That was his inspiration. If I wasn't a physicist, I'd be a musician. I live my dreams in music. I imagine music. Okay, so good advocate for music education. So the myelination occurs, and some of the first studies on myelin and repetition were on violinists and pianists. Seminal studies, seminal meaning those initial studies that really get the research world thinking about this particular topic and exploring further. Right, just about, can we go over for 5 and then we'll come back 5 later? Is that okay with everybody? Just want to finish off a couple of things here. I actually trigger finger. I meant to ask a question before that. What are some of the issues with repetition? But these are rhetorical questions because I know that you'll know that if you practice it wrong, because, and you know, these kids, they gloss over, don't they? They gloss over what they're practicing, as we know from that McPherson study. The learning brain doesn't differentiate, doesn't distinguish between good and bad habits. It's a faithful servant to your repetition. Kids, so be very careful how you practice. You practice rubbish, rubbish in, rubbish out. You practice that way, that's what you get. So don't give, so to speak, a sucker an even break. Be really careful with your mistakes. So mistake avoidance. It's good. Are there people who practice like that deliberately, as slow as it takes or whatever, never to make a mistake in their practice? That's how Rachmaninoff used to practice. Mistakes is one issue. Being careful with mistakes. What's the other one? What do children say? Hey, what's the problem with repetition? What do they say? Boring. Yeah. So the thing is, we don't find it boring because we know how to repeat. We know how to repeat. We know that repetition, unlike the drill, doesn't mean doing exactly the same thing again and again. We know that repetition means taking the essence of an idea and altering it slightly in a number of ways. In psychology, they call that contextual interference, right? For those of you interested in the terminology. Just because one of the ways we vary is tempo and dynamics and articulation. Who does it rhythmically in a dot, dash, dash, dot? So you've got your straight quavers. Use a straight quaver piece. That might sound crash to our ears, but that's not the point, is it? It's about keeping us, as you set up the back there, alert and focused learning, not just drifting off, oh, we're having pizza tonight for tea. No, this provides a little bit of interference to up the ante and keep me focused, and at the same time, I'm getting the muscle memory going. Now, we know that there's no memory in muscles, don't we? Just to be clear on that, it all comes from the brain. But we are learning, we're going through the repetition process. And when we come back, we'll talk, like Mike mentioned before, about practicing without the instrument. Another great way to engage variable repetition. But that's the book. If you want further reading and reminders and all the, you've got all the studies and the bibliography, it's all there. Okay? Focus pursuit. That's another type of variable repetition, which we'll get to in just a moment. But firstly, and Michael touched on this about the power of the imagination. The most common way to play music, well, that's probably not true, is it? It is in a Western European context, perhaps, is I sit down at my instrument and I put sheet music up and I play. But engaging the imagination and learning without the instrument, there's 3 other quadrants in this simple little diagram. So playing without music notation. So these are other ways to practice and to challenge oneself as well. And what we know about these different ways of playing is they activate the brain in a different way. So I just thought I'd say a couple of things about this. So with instrument, without notation, that could be improvising, it could be playing by ear, it could be playing from memory. Now memory is an interesting one because by and large, a lot of people have got this fixed mindset, this fixed idea on their memory capacity. Like, I'm no good at playing without music. I'm no good at playing with memory. The research doesn't back that up. Research about memory suggests that we all have capability of remembering, but it's so closely tied with chunking processes and specific skills. So you take the grand chess master who can remember 200 games backwards, every move, are no better than you or I at other memory tasks. It's domain specific. It's the same with music. You look at the jazz musician, how can they play so many pieces? Well, when you understand the nature of jazz chord progressions and moving in fourths, then you realise that there's a lot of similarity and a lot of chunking processes underpinning that. So another thing we know about those non-notation playing processes is 2 things. One is they tend to activate the right hemisphere of the brain a bit more than reading notation, becomes slightly more of a left hemisphere musical activity. So the brain responds. So if we want a whole brain activity, playing with and without music is a good thing to do. We also know that teachers often don't actively teach this in class. It's a difficult, or in their lesson, it's a difficult thing to teach. But it can be chunked down to a 4-bar challenge, a 2-bar challenge, can't it? You know, how much can you play without the music? And students are often a lot better at this than what they think they are and what we think they are. I had a mentor once in Adelaide where I used to teach. He said, Michael, they know a lot more. I was taking a choir and he said, it's time they got rid of that music, Michael. I said, I don't think they're ready. He said, they know a lot more than you think they do. And he was right. Which I discarded him. He said, wow, they do know it. And here am I, defining my paradigm of belief system, holding them back. So the other thing about this style of playing, and I've mentioned this name, Gary McPherson, but he did another study. In fact, I was at a Perth conference back in the 90s when this guy spoke about his latest study, and it was this. He says, the students who are most likely to continue their post-school life actively engaged in community music making are those who are not tied to notation alone. Right? So those who can improvise a bit, play by ear, play Happy Birthday at the party, play without their music. Oh, I can't play, I need my music. Okay? They're more likely to become your lifelong music activists. So for me, therefore that becomes a very important consideration. Another study found that adult learners, people who are tied to notation, have an inkling inside that they're therefore not that musical. So it affects their musical self-image. You know, my friend over here, he can play Happy Birthday in any key and I can't. I can play Beethoven, but I have to have the notes in front of me. They suspect that this person is more musical than them. They've got the trombone at home. I said, okay. I said, good news is, still come to rehearsal. I've got some spare sheet music. He said, but I've got no trombone. I said, well, air trombone, mate, air trombone. And I explained, I said, it's actually wonderful because I've been learning about this stuff, about you can learn without playing. So what I want you to do is, is play the music and do every movement, just imagine it as if you're actually playing. He said, you're not serious, you're going to make me do this. And he did. Yeah. He did. Why should he get a free break when you can learn that way? He's learning.
Why can't we do that with all band practice?
No instruments. We'll call it air band, yeah?
Now, of course, the thing about air playing is you actually have to have a conception in your mind of what's going on. But these air guitarists who've never played a real guitar, no, that doesn't work. It's the same with choir. Kids get, I've got a cold, I've got a sore throat. Of course, no, I don't want you to sing. I know that might, exacerbate your problem. But you can sit up the back and you can mouth and enunciate without putting pressure on the vocal mechanism and follow us with the dynamics and follow the score and have a jolly good listen. Right? You can still participate. Okay. One last type of repetition, another type of variable repetition, is one that gets less emphasis and is probably less appropriate for the little kids, but is used so much by professionals and a very powerful way to learn. Just take you through that. It's related to distributed practice, which we mentioned before, that if you've got 6 hours a week to practice, do it close to an hour a day, rather than all in one hit. In fact, if you're doing an hour a day, why not break it into 2 half-hour sections? Right? Distribute it. The more repetition with spaces between, the better. And I think the thinking might have changed a bit. I'm not sure about this, but certainly in my day, when I was a boy, expected to do an hour to an hour and a half on the piano when I was 14 or 15. I found it a real chore because Mum had this idea that, Michael, you need to stay there for an hour. You can't stop. And that's just not how it works. According to neuroscience, which governs my rules for how we practice. Take it from neuroscience. Having breaks is okay. In fact, I've got a study coming up to show you more about this from Texas. Breaks. So spaced repetition is a similar idea when we're repeating. I've mentioned drills, which we call block repetition. Now, this is how most people repeat. So I've got 30 minutes for my piano practice. Okay, I'm going to spend 10 minutes on the Bach, 10 on the Mozart, 10 on the Gershwin. And people generally do that little block before they move to the next block. I'll consolidate that. Good, I think I've got that 10 minutes. I'll do this. And that's block repetition. However, you can distribute that time in other ways, can't you? And this is the essence of spaced repetition. It's more randomised. I'll spend 3 minutes on the Bach, or a couple of minutes on the Beethoven, back to the Bach, a bit on the Gershwin. I'm still doing 10, 10, 10 at the fullness of the 30 minutes. But I'm mixing it all up. Sound crazy? Chris?
Do you think that would apply to classroom activities?
It doesn't apply to conceptual learning, and I make that very clear to the children I speak to, particularly I don't talk about that if it's the lilies. They get confused easily. They're better just doing some blocks, and they don't know how many repetitions it takes. Like as we become more metacognitive, sure, no one has to tell you how many repetitions to do to get that bit right. Little least you might say, I want you to do this 6 times, as you were saying before, right? No, it doesn't apply if students are learning Year 12 physics, Thompson's electromagnetic experiment. You're not going to suddenly shift and do this. No, it's conceptual learning. This is skill development, and it works in concert with blocked because you need to have a schema of how it works pretty clear in your mind. So you might do, it's a very metacognitive understanding, right? You really have to understand how your learning's working. So you might do enough block repetition to get the essence of the idea and the neural circuit forming, and then to consolidate that, you might shift into this spaced repetition mode. But research says it is twice as effective as block repetition. And as we said before, the drill, block repetition, delusion, competence, you can't do it the next day, and you get into this, wow, that 8 iron's working really well. I've got it on a string, I'm zoning it every time. How did I see Tiger Woods practice? 2 8 irons, a 5 iron. Back to the 8 iron. Well, one of the reasons this is so effective is because beginnings are difficult. I don't mean beginning of music, I mean just getting your mind ready. A beginning action is difficult. So you've got this, I had that a moment ago, I've forgotten the Beethoven, I'm the Bach, go back to the Beethoven, oh, how did that go again? Beginnings are difficult. So your brain has to get the neural structures ready for that coordinated sequence of action to make it happen. And as we say to students, difficulty is good. If it's not difficult, you're probably not learning. You need to embrace a level of difficulty. This is used in lots of contexts, and even musically. I mean, I'm sure some of you taking a choir session, you might do this piece, and this piece, but then you'll say, okay, before we go, just get out the John Grutter again. There's another example of this in a different context. If you watch TV in Australia and you go to a commercial break, there will generally be 5 advertisements on in a row. Okay. Now the first one will be the Toyota car ad. The second one will be on Twisties. Guess what the third ad break will be? The Toyota car ad. Space distribution. The fourth one will be a Mars bar ad. The fifth one? Toyota cars. They've rondo formed the advertisements. Hey, that belongs to us. And you've learnt Toyota cars. You walk out there whistling because they've got you. Because you think, I've forgotten that. Oh, it's back again. Oh, Mars bar. Toyotas. If they've got you. That learning psychology. That's about Ernest Heminghaus, the German. They're all his ideas. the recency effect, the primacy effect, the forgetting curve, the learning curve. Memory retrieval is another overarching concern, along with motivation, as far as I'm concerned, for educators. So I think this is related. It's those spaces to allow the mind to sort things out and to freshen up. I like that too. Robert Duke in Texas, I was at a conference in China a few years ago, and this guy presented the stuff about having a rest break. And his experiment, neat little experiment, was this. He said, let's do half an hour music practice. Now we'll have 3 groups. Some of you, the first group, don't have a rest, just play a half hour, do your practice for half an hour. This group here, take a break about 10 minutes in. He called that an early rest break. Have a break, just for a few minutes, clear your mind. And the other group, a late rest break, about 20 minutes in. Which was the most effective way to practice? Put up your hand if you think early rest break, late, no break, just plough through. Okay, who wants to justify the early rest break first? Who wants to say why they thought that?
Maybe it'll allow you to consolidate what you already did in the first 10 minutes.
Brain isn't tired.
I think you're still relatively fresh and you can process what you've just done.
Like, take 10 minutes just to get that first 10 minutes focused, and then if you take a break, like from 5,
Okay.
you might be counterproductive, having a later break.
Well, we'll find out. Later break? Why?
Earn the break.
Sorry?
Earn the break. You know, do most of the work before.
And no one put their hand up for the latest condition. Well, the answer was the early rest break. And Robert Duke's, it's a bit wordy. Early breaks during the initial phases of motor sequence learning allow time for the neurophysical processes that underlie consolidation to engage, and that after extended intervals of rest early in the training sessions, the encoding is in some way advanced. So it seems to work better is how I take that. So what I find interesting about teaching and learning is a lot of things are intuitive, but not everything. There's a few surprises out there, isn't there? Like spaced repetition and the fact that it's used like it is in marketing. Those ads are so much more expensive to design like that. Toyota paid big bucks for that. Because as well as the rondo form spaces where the paradox of learning kicks in, the great paradox, forgetting is the friend of learning. Forgetting is crucial for memory recall. Because beginnings are difficult and the brain has to get these, what did he call it, neurophysical structures set to go. But they've also got the recency and the primacy effect. People remember the first thing they heard and the last thing they heard more so than what's in between. And rondo form's got that covered as well.
So the beginning and the end has to be good in the performance.
Yeah. And people say, you know, you're giving a speech or a keynote or something, do you focus on, you know, hit them hard at the start or great end? Well, you need to be effective in both. Well, it's interesting you say that because he makes the point, this is an experiment with simple little motor action. It hasn't been tested and extrapolated to playing a Chopin etude or anything like that, right? So we don't know, unless he's done work on it since. This is about, 4 years ago, Beijing, so when he presented this stuff. So, I don't know. Should we sing a song?
Yeah.
What should we sing? It's a lovely day today. No, what should we sing about? What should we sing about, Chris? What's a good topic for a song?
Autumn leaves. It's autumn.
Hey? Well, how about we sing about repetition? All you have to do is repeat after me. Okay. Repetition. Repetition. Learns it best. Learns it best. Great connection stronger. Great connection you want that song, I can send you a PDF and you can share it. But we know that learning songs are mnemonic devices. Mnemonic devices, they help us our recall. So other areas of the school will use mnemonic devices, such as mathematics. The circumference of the circle goes round and round, pi d long. Don't know that. Second languages use learning songs a lot. Get the kids to make up their own words. Why does it work so effectively? Because music is the most emotional of the arts, and as well as repetition, the other way to consolidate learning is to have an emotional experience that goes with it. Right? So it's a nice way to learn. It's a fun way to learn. That's it on repetition. You'll be happy to know we've had a good look at that. Chunking.